Hello and welcome to another video from Toll Genealogy. Today we're going to be talking about people tracing or living people searching for genealogy purposes. So why do we want to trace living people? It's not about stalking them, just to be clear. There are two reasons why you might be searching for people. The first is that you have a great DNA match, but they don't have a family tree and you need to see if you can build it out yourself. Maybe you've tried contacting them, but they don't answer messages, or you can see they haven't logged on to Ancestry in a very long time, or whichever site you're using. And that's why we might want to see what we can find out about them. The other reason you might need to trace living people is if you're interested in a particular set of ancestors that you have and you need or you want to do some DNA research on those ancestors, and so you want to identify other people who descend from that ancestor or ancestors to see if they potentially would be interested in DNA testing for you. The great thing about people searching and doing kind of the work yourself to find out about DNA matches is it means you're not dependent on waiting for a response to them. If somebody hasn't logged on to Ancestry for a very long time, you might already be thinking, well, there's probably little point in sending them a message because they're probably not going to respond. Or you might have sent out message after message and just be getting really frustrated at people not responding to you. So yeah, basically this, if you can identify the person yourself, if you can identify their family tree, that allows you to progress your research even if they never respond to you, even if they never log on to Ancestry again. Now, it's important to say that you can't always do this for your DNA matches. If you have a Peter Jones, a Philip Smith, if you have a very common named match and their profile gives zero information about them whatsoever, you're not going to be able to use this technique because there are quite a lot of Philip Smiths in the world, or whichever name I said. There's quite a lot of them in the world, right? There's quite a lot of John Smiths, There's never a beer called John Smith. Anyway, you get the point, But what I would say is with those matches that have common names, or maybe not even a common name, but when you kind of look in records, like birth records for people of that name, there's still far too many. I've had quite recently, in fact, a name that I thought, oh, this should be good. I doubt there's many people of this name. They were probably in the UK based on the matches and the person's tree that I knew of. And no, when I looked, there were like 20 people with that name, a name that I'd never heard of before, but there were 20 people roughly in the UK with that name. And I had nothing else to go on, so clearly I'm not going to be able to do the work for that one. But yes, what I was going to say is even if you have a really common named match, it can be useful to look at the shared matches with that particular match, because you may find somebody in that group who has a less common name who potentially could be a very close relative to them. With MyHeritage and say GEDmatch, you can tell that information. You can't tell that information with Ancestry. So sometimes it's a case of you don't know until you know, but that's just a side point to note. So I just got interrupted by the telephone, so apologies if there's a sharp jump in the editing here. I guess I won't know that until I actually do the editing, but I'll carry on. So what are the methods we can use to search for our DNA matches in other places, identify what the genealogy is, or any living people we've identified as being descendants of a particular ancestor of ours or set of ancestors. So my first port of call is Facebook. I'd say probably 98% of the time it's Facebook. And the reason for that is if you can find a Facebook profile for somebody that generally has the most information you can possibly find about a person, depending on obviously how much information they've made public on their Facebook profile, or if they've made friends, if they have a lot of photos, that kind of thing. And the reason I really like Facebook is, I've also put on the slide here that a good way to search for people is to use the fan principle. Now, if you don't know what the fan principle is, it essentially means you're looking for somebody's friends, associates and neighbours, kind of who they interact with basically. And obviously social media sites like Facebook are perfect for this. Chef's kiss for this. Now, more recently, when I'm using Facebook, I do notice that the vast majority of people don't share their friends lists, which is fine. I now just consider it a bonus if they do have a friends list that I can search in. But the biggest thing that I have found helpful hints from generally is pictures that people tend to make public. I have lost count of the number of times that that people have got pictures of their ancestors. Like they might have a picture of their granny, their granddad, their deceased parents, quite often on like their birthdays or anniversaries of their deaths, that kind of thing, or Father's Day, Mother's Day. There's so often that people will post a picture of their beloved relative who's no longer with us, and they might not give enough information about them for you to tell who that person is. But quite often there's comments, or you look at who else has liked or, hearted the picture. And just looking at that list of people who've interacted with that picture can help you find those important other relatives, friends who might say, oh, I remember such and such, that kind of thing. So potentially you can not just find out a birth date, figure out a rough death date to then search for an obituary. You might have a whole actual name. You might know if it's a man, if they did war service, or just something interesting that somebody did in wartime. Wedding pictures is another great one, because obviously weddings are generally, your friends and your family go to those, don't they? And if somebody's labelled those pictures, or again, you're looking at who's loved or commented on those pictures, that can lead you to other family members. So whilst if you found a Facebook profile for your DNA match, whilst they might not give much information away, you could find somebody with the same surname, or somebody who looks like a mum or a dad or an auntie, that kind of thing, and go through to their profiles and find much more. So that's why I love Facebook. To a lesser extent, you can do the same thing on Instagram and Pinterest. I wouldn't go and search Instagram or Pinterest, but if I see either on Facebook them mentioning an Instagram profile, or I've run a Google search for a username or something like that, if I come across an Instagram account, I'll take a look at it and see if there's any, again, kind of family pictures, that kind of thing, or who's interacting. So social media is my number one. Obituaries is probably my number one, but I count that slightly differently, because you kind of, if you're, depending on where you're doing your research, if it's America, you'll quite often find those obituaries on Ancestry itself, or whichever site you're using. Somebody will have linked to them. Or you can just have a quick look on Find a Grave to see if somebody's posted the obituary there. But otherwise, Google is your friend. And again, Google is quite often how I find some of those obituaries if they're not mentioned through Ancestry. So I'll Google if, I don't know, say I figured out a possible relative who's died through Facebook, or I've got a name from, I don't know, an earlier census record of somebody. If I search for that name in Google, I can put, either obituaries will come up, especially if it's an unusual name and the person has died, or I will put the name, maybe the place, rough date that they died, and the word obituary. That's a good one to just see what comes up, particularly for American deaths. Sometimes UK, sometimes Canadian, but I do find them for UK people, but not as regularly as for American people. And then the other method is reverse image search. Now that is particularly for the profile picture on Ancestry. So you can get a profile picture off Ancestry if somebody's got one, and you can, it's a bit finicky to get that image out, or find the web address for it sometimes, but you can do a reverse image search for that using Google. If you're not sure how to do that, literally go onto Google, in the search bar, just type reverse image search. It should take you to the right page to do that, and it'll explain what you need to do. What, darling? Hello? You want to cuddle? Or you just want to walk over my keyboard? Okay. We've been joined by a cat. No, don't do that, darling. Oh, we're just going to pick up the cat. There we go. So these are the main methods, the main ways that you can trace people. And just before, I'm going to look at the people searching in a little bit more detail with specific resources that you can use. But before we do that, I just want to cover looking for living descendants. We want to look for living descendants, don't we, darling? Yeah. So essentially, yeah, to find living descendants from a particular ancestor, you just need to build a family tree forwards in time from whichever set of from whichever set of ancestors you're interested in. You just want to build forward, so use your census records, use civil records, until you're basically, as close as you can be to living day when people will be alive. From there, you'd then use, you'd move on. You can do a Facebook search for names that you know of, which obviously if it's females, you need to check if there's been any marriage records for them, because you might not find them. Otherwise, just look for the males in the family. So that's basically the principle there. I'm going to pop you down, darling. Oh, heavy, getting heavy. So UK resources, if you're not finding stuff from Google or Ancestry. Oh, you little bugger. The best is local newspapers. So obviously if you have access to your local papers at a library, then great. Otherwise, you can see if the British Newspaper Archive has a particular newspaper that you think an obituary might have been published in. Or failing that, you probably need to take a trip to the British Library, who have every single newspaper on microfiche generally that's ever been issued in the UK. Now, I've just put a note here that if you do know that a newspaper that you're interested in is on the British Newspaper Archive, then obituaries do not show up usually in search results. Sorry. Where was I? What? Yes, so if you want to find out if an obituary exists for somebody, you need to actually read the issues, well not read, but scan through the issues where you think the obituary might appear to find the announcement pages and then look through them. This is going to be outtakes heaven, isn't it, darling? Oh, there you go. Okay, so yeah, that's basically it for obituaries. And just to note as well, actually, if you do need to go to the British Library to look at papers on microfiche, you need to book them in advance. So don't just turn up at the British Library hoping that you'll find what you need. Because that's not going to work, is it, darling? That's not going to work at all, is it? No, it's not. Electoral roll searches. There's basically two places. Bye-bye. Okay, got fed up of that, I think. Electoral roll searches. There's really only two places. There's 192.com or Find My Past. I quite often use the 192 search, and then I'll see if I can find the record or Find My Past from there. Just because 192 doesn't give you very much information off the bat, and every record you have to pay for. So I find their search better for this particular purpose. So I'll see if I can find anything through 192 that looks potentially interesting. And then I'll search for the record at Find My Past under my subscription. If through a Google search somebody's linked to a company, or it looks like they have their own business, or even sometimes I have found on the Ancestry profile itself somebody might list their business. I do, for example, because why not? Yeah, if you find anything like that, it is worth doing a search for them at the Companies House website. I don't have a link for that, but literally go to Google, type in Companies House, and make sure you get them on the gov.uk, because that will be the actual government website. And then it's a really easy search function you can do to search for company directors, and that can give you an address, a rough location, and a rough date of, not the actual date of birth generally, it's just got the month and the year, or just the year. But yeah, that's quite a good tip. As far as an actual people database in the UK, 192 is really the only one that we have. And if you're not from the UK and not familiar with what the electoral roll is, it's essentially, well, it's not essentially, it is people who are registered to vote in the elections. But the important thing to know about the UK electoral roll is that there is the whole register of everyone who's opted in to vote, and then there's the edited register. And the edited register is people who opt in to having their information made available to databases like 192. The vast majority of people in Britain do not opt in because they don't want phone calls, they don't want marketing bump, so they opt out. So it is quite rare that you find people on the electoral roll, at least currently. Generally, if you find anything, it's going to be a more historical record from, say, the early 2000s, that kind of thing. So that's just something for you to know. Property searches. So this could be where maybe through the electoral roll you found an old address in, say, 2000, 2002, something like that. Or you're actually doing a house history. Property searches can help you there. And electoral rolls can help you in a different way there, in that, again, the British Library has every single electoral roll throughout the time it's been going. So if you want to trace who is currently living at an address or who's lived at an address in the past, if you know which electoral roll will cover that particular address, you can go back through the electoral roll through the years to find out. And again, if you've got an address from an old electoral roll and you want to see if somebody is still there, you can find the current electoral roll, find the address on that electoral roll and see if the same people are listed. Or the other thing you can do is go to the land registry site and order the property information record for that property to see who owns it and if it's the person that was living there before. Now, obviously, that's not going to help you if somebody rents. And like I said earlier, for the electoral roll, it's not going to help you if somebody isn't registered to vote. And the other thing to note about electoral roll, like the unedited electoral roll, if you're going to the British Library to view it, you cannot search for a person in the physical unedited electoral rolls. You can only search by address. So it's only if you know a particular address or if you're interested in a particular road, you search for that and then you can see who lives there. There's no ability to do a search of a person and then find their address. Okay, if you're from the US and you're wondering about what US resources you can use, now full disclosure, because obviously I'm in the UK, I can't use most of these sites. So that means I can't say these sites are great. I can't give you any opinion on them. I can't say that they're, I don't know. Some of them, sometimes people searching sites can be a little bit, for want of a better term, sketchy. I can't say for any of these sites. The only site I use for US searches is White Pages. And literally the only reason for that is because that's the only site left to me that I can search from the UK. And even then for only a limited number of searches. So what I did for this list is I asked my colleagues at the DNA project, who are based in the US, I asked them what are their favourite sites for doing people research in the US. And this is the list of all the sites that were mentioned. Now, I do have experience of being verified. Being verified is expensive. Oh, not expensive. There's a charge. I think there's a charge for all of these actually, apart from the basic version of White Pages. But yeah, Been Verified is, I guess, kind of the one that is most recommended, that I see most recommended. And don't quote me on this, but I believe it's the one that CC Moore uses. I could be wrong about that. Again, don't quote me, but I'm sure I saw her mention that somewhere. I've used Been Verified when I've been on trips to the US and before they closed it down to people like me. Spokeo I used to use a lot before they put geo kind of blocking on it. Instant Checkmate I don't think I've ever been able to use. I don't think I've ever tried it. I don't even know how you say this one. Epios, I don't know. Anyway, Epios, What's My Name, and Truthfinder. I think I've heard of Truthfinder but never tried it out. Epios and What's My Name, literally brand new to me. I'd never heard of them before. A couple of people actually mentioned that they really liked Epios, so that may be one to check out. Again, no links for any of these, but do a Google, they'll come up. So if you're in the UK and you need to search for a DNA match who appears to be in the US, you would try White Pages. And White Pages, there's kind of two versions. There's a basic free version and a kind of premium version. Now, when you do a search for somebody on White Pages, it will give you the premium results at the top, generally speaking, and then the basic results underneath. Anytime you try and click on those premium ones, you'll get a message that basically says, you can't do that, you're not in this country. It doesn't do that for the free ones, but you kind of have to be careful what you click on. What is useful about White Pages is that it also tells you who it thinks somebody's relatives are, and that can be really helpful to try and identify DNA match's parents. If you can see it's linked to somebody who are roughly, twice the age of the person you've been looking at, that could be a good indication that's possibly parents. If you see they're linked to somebody who's kind of in their 80s or 90s, it sounds really morbid, but I have had success searching for them an obituary, because people tend to stay in those databases for a couple of years after they've died. So yeah. So those are all my favourite sources. I'm afraid I don't have any for Canada. I don't have any for Australia. As far as I know, and as far as a Canadian colleague of mine at the DDP has said, there is nothing for Canada, and I'm pretty sure there's nothing for Australia either. Certainly for Canada, it's because of privacy laws. Like, their privacy laws are so strict that information is just, you're not going to find it. And I think the same goes for Australia as well. If you do have any sources for Australia or New Zealand or anywhere else in the world, please do let me know or put in the comments, because I think that could be really useful for other people. Just because I'm not aware of it doesn't mean something doesn't exist. Yeah. That's it. I hope you found that useful / interesting. As this slide says, there's other things you can check out on the channel. Please like and subscribe if you like the content, if you want to keep an eye on the channel, if you want to help me spread the word out to other people who maybe don't know this channel exists yet, which, that's most of the world's population that don't know that it exists. So, yeah, all that kind of good stuff. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.